And here we are, two pros, one noob, and it's the Harry Potter special. It's Prisoner of Azkaban, the third book. I'm joined by my fellow pro, Mr. Don Bailey, and our noob, Stephen Pryor, who, that is right, has never read the Harry Potter series before. And we're moving on to the third book in the series. Steve, what do you make of this one? What are you expecting?
Yeah, very excited. I've enjoyed the journey so far. Someone asked me the other day, what would you have done if you just hated the first one? Would you have carried on? And I sort of explained that I didn't really have a choice, as I had signed up to the whole hog. But luckily for everyone involved, I have enjoyed so far and I'm extremely excited about book 3, mainly because most people I speak to claim it to be either their favorite book or certainly sort of an entry into when things really start to heat up.
Well, I know one of those people is Don Bailey. I'm not going to reveal whether it's his favourite book or not at this early stage of the podcast series, but it's certainly up there.
Yeah, do you know what? I think it doesn't quite come into the reckoning for being favourite, but certainly if I could go back to the beginning and read them like Steve is with a fresh set of eyes, knowing what I know now, it's the one that I'd be most excited to get stuck into.
Oh, that's whetting your appetite, isn't it, Steve? So we want to know from you then, what do you expect to happen in this book, given everything you know from the previous 2 books and everything we've discussed? You know there's 7 books, obviously, as well. So that kind of would give you the knowledge of where you might predict certain things might happen. Do you expect, and you also have kind of heard from us about in the past where the series maybe lights up a little bit and where it gets a bit more grown up and exciting. So what do you kind of think is going to happen in the next book specifically? I'm not asking for a specific plot points, but what are you anticipating? Slightly more of the same or a slight change of pace?
First, I'm really looking forward to the next book because I know a lot of people have said it's really, really good. So I'm excited for that. Obviously, we also get a little nod to the title in this book as well. So I feel like I have a tiny bit of context already. I've sort of got some sort of idea of Alcatraz existing somewhere near Hogwarts, and a lot of the evil influences that have passed through Hogwarts previously are housed there, basically.
Wait, do you think it's actually called Alcatraz? Sorry.
No.
All right.
I know it's Azkaban. And the Prisoner of Alcatraz. No. So obviously that's kind of what that's obviously what we know so far. It feels a little bit though like if you think of the things we've discussed and the idea of it being a prison of some description, that it's likely to lean into a lot of the storylines that we've already started to express, the heir of Slytherin, perhaps various other attempts at coups that have happened in history as well, or people who have been involved in attempts at revolution, if you like, could be the people that are housed there. But it's also a singular prisoner, right? So I don't know if it's full of people or if it could just be one individual is also a thing. But then they threw Hagrid in there for a while, so there must be some space. There's got to be, right?
And I mean, obviously, so far we've had similar structure of plot where they go to school and they go throughout a school year and they do that again. And you have all the other bits that go with being at Hogwarts as well. So you kind of do expect all that to continue as is.
Well, obviously, he's just gone back to the Dursleys. So it feels like Harry has to exist in some sort of magical environment for these elements of his narrative to come to life. Like magic can come to him in the case of Dobby and them visiting the house, but it feels like he's always being pulled away from that environment. So I think you also said earlier they all run through school years, so I fully expect that to also be the case. So yeah, I guess kind of similar is probably how I would be thinking of it.
Okay, well, that was what Steve thinks about what's going to happen in the Prisoner of Azkaban. He really doesn't seem to have a clue, to be honest, Tom. He hasn't got much idea. He's very focused on the idea that Azkaban is central to the plot, and it's this prison, and there's not really he's not really got any idea at all. So,
which is interesting because he was, I thought, really good across the first two, like really good, really close. And actually, funny what you say about Azkaban and him thinking it's central to the plot, because we know Azkaban is the one that kind of like is a bit of an outlier to the whole of the series, isn't it? It's the one that's furthest away from being central to the plot, really.
Yeah, and there's no reason why once he starts reading it, he'll pick it up quite quickly. Anyway, it's a lot. It's hard to sort of predict, really, isn't it? What's going to happen when all you've got to go off is the previous book's plots. This universe could go absolutely anywhere. Do we expect him to unravel the mysteries as well? I mean, this one particularly is a very there's a lot going on, and the way it's all tied together at the end is incredible.
Yeah, well, obviously the ending is where many people kind of see the whole series as that being the turning point, and that's when it changes from this really magical sort of kids book that we have in the first couple to where we first see multiple plot lines, multiple new characters already come into it and develop into something a lot more serious. But will he unravel it? I don't know. I think this is the first time there's a proper twist at the end. I know the first two books did build to a crescendo, and you could argue there was a twist at the end of Philosopher's Stone, but I think this is the first time we've had enough time to really soak in probably the whole of the Wizarding world and Harry's world, and now have enough context for there to be a really shocking twist to us.
He's always been very set on the idea of Snape being evil, and that's one of his running themes throughout. Do you think that this hopefully will reinforce that view of his quite nicely, really, won't it, by the end?
Yeah, it's strange because we kind of see Snape in a sort of exactly the same light, but kind of really different. It's a much pettier kind of relatable dislike that Snape actually has and adopts in this book, isn't it? I think we're as confused as Harry across the first two, but for once, maybe we do understand where Snape is coming from.
And do you think that there's any chance that he guesses that Sirius is actually not the villain that Rowling portrays him to be for the first sort of 3/4 of this book, or even 4/5?
No, I actually think it's really hard to predict that, to be honest. I mean, unless you're in a mindset where you think every book has to have a twist, or every one of these storylines has to have a twist, and that's why. Because I think this is the first time that we see Harry getting wrong information from the Wizarding world. Like beforehand, people in other books, the first two, people didn't know what was going on. He didn't know what was going on. Kind of all the same, but this time we see adults withholding information. We see people telling him things that they actually know to be false as well. So no, I think that twist is much harder to see, to be honest.
Right. Well, we've sort of covered everything there. It's hard to go into too much detail when he hasn't really given us too much to go on himself, which is understandable. He's not read it, but so without further ado, the next time you hear from us, along with Steve, he would have read the book. So here are his voice notes on the chapter by chapter of Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban.
We are on to the Prisoner of Azkaban, chapters 1 and 2, Owl Post, and Aunt Margie's Big Mistake. I feel like in the first three books, this format of chapters 1 and 2 has been relatively consistent, really, back at Privet Drive, serving as that reminder of what the Muggle world is. And I think there's a lot of parallels, actually, with, many of the things that the Dursleys say and think as a representation of what much of the UK is like, hanging convicts and various other disapprovals of urban life. But then obviously we have Harry's big escape, which feels a little bit more dramatic earlier on this time around. So I feel like we're picking up the pace quite quickly finally, and this might not make the edit, but I finally have context as to where the playlist, the esteemed playlist by this podcast host, The Monster Book of Monsters, has come from. Chapters 3 and 4, The Night Bus and The Leaky Cauldron. The night bus sounding somewhat like the 30 to Hackney Wick that I got on the weekend. Chaos, crashes all over the place, 100 mile an hour. And the introduction to Sirius Black, big name in the series, someone that I have heard of before, but have not come across until this point. So it's good to see the introduction of another big character. And it's never been so overt, really, that an enemy is out to get Harry, I guess, at all, but certainly not so early in a book. Normally we kind of establish that antagonist quite late on, I find, in the conclusion of the first two books, but really setting a new precedent by creating such an enemy with such clear motives so early. I'm questioning, is he a manifestation of Voldemort or merely an ex-acquaintance? I'm not sure. Chapters 5 and 6, the Dementor and Talons and Tea Leaves. Obviously, the Dementor attack feels like a very significant moment, and in fact, the introduction of the Dementors generally, they seem to have a strange dual role, in the sense that on one hand they're there to protect. It almost feels like they're kind of appointed by Hogwarts, but clearly in Harry's case they can also cause harm as well. So one wonders if there's somehow, some link to how he survived Voldemort, and that they may have some sort of role to play in that narrative, given the impact they have on him upon appearance. Introduction of a couple of new characters as well. We've got Lupin, who seems a little bit all-knowing, in the sense that he's present despite being asleep, but still can come as a saviour, which is interesting. And Trelawney as well. I'm enjoying the introduction of what seems to be another troll-like character, like Lockhart. Finally, the Hagrid promotion is interesting, and it makes me wonder if he's got more goodwill in the Hogwarts quarters than I expected. He's always given the benefit of the doubt, despite his clumsiness, and this kind of fuels that even more. So we shall see. Chapters 7 and 8, The Boggart in the Wardrobe and The Flight of the Fat Lady. Interesting, Malfoy saying he'd want revenge if it was him against Sirius Black suggests that there is some link, certainly, to the lineage of non-Muggles, Malfoy, Voldemort, Slytherin, to Sirius Black and the death of James Potter. So it feels like there's some connection there. I think the Boggarts are a great species addition to the book, and interesting that obviously Harry was skipped a go, which suggests that Lupin has some kind of overarching watch out or knowledge for Harry, and I think you start to see that a lot more. He's forming that position of a carer in that kind of Dumbledore mode, is my vibe from him right now. Chapters 9 and 10, Grim Defeat and the Marauder's Map. Wow, this is a real unexpected set of revelations. I don't think I expected so much of the back story to have unfolded as early as it does here. Earlier on in the chapters, obviously, we have Dementors ruining the Quidditch match, and Harry does show that fallibility quite often. I think maybe before reading, I expected him to be someone who could always rise above the challenges around him, but I've been surprised to see how frequently he can be pegged back, if you like, and it feels like when he's in the presence of maybe darker forces, then that becomes more and more frequent, if that be the Dementors in this instance. But yeah, massive revelations.
chapters 11 and 12, the Firebolt and the Patronus. The Firebolt really feels like it might be an intervention, which seems to happen to Harry in various instances. And it does feel like there might be a group, kind of an all-knowing group, who are looking or out to protect him across maybe Dumbledore and Lupin and McGonagall. And much like the invisibility cloak previously, it feels like there are sort of silent interventions from those who understand the risk that Harry is under. So that would be my guess as to where that might be coming from. I know McGonagall obviously then confiscated it, but this may also have been an act to ensure that he was applying vigilance at all times, given the threat he's under. Also, I think Hermione's response of being extremely concerned is interesting, and obviously she's in a period of deep study in this entire phase, which makes me wonder if she is perhaps also gaining knowledge about the situation, which means that giving Harry a reason or a need to be more vigilant, which may also be why she's quite resentful when they continuously suggest for her to stop studying. Chapters 13 and 14, Gryffindor versus Ravenclaw and Snape's grudge. First sign, I think, really of the theme of love coming for Harry with Cho Chang, but it also feels like it's quite short-lived. It exists really in a real short burst, right, in that chapter, and then kind of disappears quite quickly. But I'm sure that that's a theme that is going to keep on moving forward. Neville being Neville, obviously nothing new and no surprises there. Harry continues to push the boundaries really more than I probably expected, obviously with the disappearance to Hogsmeade. And then I think it all gets a bit psychedelic with regards Snape and Lupin emerging from the fire towards the end. There's clearly a relationship between the two of them. Feels a bit like they represent good and evil sides of the same coin almost, but it's not entirely clear to me yet.
Chapters 15 and 16, the Quidditch final and Professor Trelawney's prediction. Feels like a very progressive few chapters for Hermione, who's really kind of breaking free of the lockdown shackles of studying. I think I feel like there's a reference to time with Hermione, constant reference to lessons being at the same time, to exams being at the same time, and her not responding to that. And then obviously the revelation at the end of the chapter that Scabbers is still alive somehow feels like it could be connected to Hermione and an ability to transcend time would be one of the more kind of out there theories at this stage. Chapters 17 and 18, Cat, Rat and Dog, and Moony, Wormtail, Padfoot and Prongs. Whoa, it's all happening. Revelations everywhere. I feel like we're in the absolute heat of the end of Prisoner of Azkaban here. And it's very difficult really to know who to trust. There's a lot going on, and we've just had Snape's arrival. I think my trust is still... I think it's still with Lupin, but I'm a bit worried that I've been duped into that. But I feel like he still takes on a kind of all-knowing role, a bit like Dumbledore. So I'm still maintaining trust there, but it's obviously being pushed by what we've seen here. And then, obviously, I'm interested to read on immediately to understand the Snape relationship to Lupin. Snape and James Potter feels like it has parallels to Draco and Harry in terms of school relationship, but we'll see if that comes through any further.
Chapters 19 and 20, The Servant of Lord Voldemort and the Dementor's Kiss. Wow, truly hundreds of plot twists and turns at this point. Peter Pettigrew, I didn't see this coming, to be honest, with the big reveal. I think there's got to be questions asked as to
Snape's interference. I think it leans a little bit into the previous theories of, him having some relation along the way to Slytherin or the enemy or to Voldemort, given that he's so keen to cast out both Sirius Black and Lupin. And obviously it's one of the first moments that we really see Harry happy, truly happy, but it's extremely momentary. And now we're on the cliff edge with regards to who they have seen, which can surely only be Hagrid and the Hippogriff, James Potter, or Voldemort himself.
Well, there he is, fresh off his voice notes. Me, Dom, and Steve are here to discuss in full detail Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. Where on earth do we start? First of all, Steve, let's just hear from you. What did you make of the book? Did you really enjoy that one?
Loved it. It was definitely my favourite yet, I think. And I think most of the things that people had said to me in advance were true, which is just it feels like everything steps up a notch, particularly like that last run of sort of, it's as many as I guess 6 to 8 chapters probably. It feels like everything sort of goes up a notch, as I said, in terms of the layers of the plot, but also probably like the intensity of what is happening as well. So I really enjoyed it, and it was the last piece was a real kind of, you're flying through a real page turner towards the end.
Yeah, Dom, we've heard those voice notes there, and we'll come to the quick fire takes and some of the things that Steve was mentioning, but just briefly your initial reaction to how he sort of reacted to the book as it went.
Yeah, do you know what? It's obviously like as you're getting someone to do this, you're not quite sure how they're going to react, and we get to, I think, what we'd all think of as quite a crucial part in the series, and you're kind of, this is it, do or die. Is he going to like it as we go into these sort of the second half of this book? And so I just think mostly just really like pleasing to hear someone sort of get a buzz off it in that way, basically, and begin to recognise the extent to which it elevates and sort of some of the bits that entails. Although I would say in terms of the voice notes, it's probably the furthest he's been so far in parts to actually getting exactly what's going on and sort of what's to come as a consequence.
I think that's a lot down to the unpredictability and the nature of this book, right? It's really hard to guess. There's so many plot twists and so many different things that tie up in basically like the last 2 to 3 chapters, right? And
I think I found it. I felt quite challenged as a reader, probably because you've gone from like the relatively sort of steady paced, like again, people refer to them as children's books, like the earlier books, but I always had a sense of comfort that like, okay, we're clear on what's going on. And then when you enter like that back half here, and there's just all sorts going on, it's the first time you're really challenged as well. And I started to have a bit of like a self-consciousness as well when I was leaving the voice notes, being like, I don't know if that's meant to make sense to me, because like, everything up to this point has been like pretty, makes sense. And I feel quite lost by like what was happening at certain parts. But I feel kind of reassured, maybe from even this discussion at the start of this podcast, that I'm not alone in feeling that, and that actually there's just a gear change quite quickly that does that to a first-time reader.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that I wondered whether you would get, as an adult reader, like me and Wim and Dom read this, obviously we were kids and we had no chance really, as 10-year-olds or whatever we were reading this. But I did wonder if you would get close. And I think you did get closer than we did, I think, certainly. But it's still very cleverly written that you're not going to get everything either. So we'll kind of come to that, because there's a few references where I think that you are starting, there's bits where you're guessing bits kind of close and you're kind of nearly right. But we'll go through this podcast in the same way that we've done the other ones. We'll start with all our favorite characters and talk about their journeys. And first of all, the main man himself is Harry Potter. He is older, and as he is in every book, and therefore probably changes slightly. One of the first things that I've got about Harry in the early stages is we see a weakness from him. So he's always this pillar of strength throughout the books, in the first two, and he's the main man in sport, and he's kind of the cool kid, and he's the shiny new toy. But Malfoy, the man that's always tried to get to him and degrade him, has never really had any joy. Harry has this fainting attack with the Dementors, and Harry suddenly is mocked, and then again Harry shows more weakness in school when he's not allowed to tackle the Boggart, and everything just flips upside down for Harry in this early stages of the book. So I wondered what you made of that.
Yeah, I think it's a really exhausting book for him, really, which he sort of alludes to in the closing chapters as well. And you just really see all sides, really. I think we spoke a bit in the previous book about the weakness, and it wasn't to the same extent of this book, but I think I was surprised last time at that, because my going in perception, having never read it, was that he was, the master wizard as it was. So I don't think I ever expected there to be such a sort of a focus, if you like, on his flaws. But then I think also, like, there's quite a lot of like mischief again that comes in, which is true of previous books, but like it really comes to the fore across this book as well. And by the end, you really have you've really seen all angles of him in this one. I feel like he feels very exposed. As you said, you see the fallibility, but you see the heroism, you see courage, but you also see some vulnerability as well. And I think it's a real broadening of him as a character.
And I think you're right that there are a lot of changes that we see, and he does get broader as a character. But you've referenced it there, and even though he has changed, he sort of will never change at the same time. And even if he is scared, or even if he's showing vulnerability, he's still the guy that wants to sort it out himself and ask the questions and get involved in the difficult areas and learn new skills to help himself survive. So yeah, although he does change, we sort of see exactly the same person as well at times. I like to think.
We've talked about the series, and particularly the first two books being those more children's book types, and then we arrive into this one. Do you feel like there was more of a maturity of emotion on display, and also just more moving moments? So the idea that Harry, again, I mean, we've had that with the Mirror of Erised, where Harry was desperate to see his family, but in this instance, again, he hears his mother's voice dying. He hears his mum dying when the Dementors come into his mind. But there's a line in there where he talks about wanting to hear more in a really kind of morbid way, but that's just like this longing, isn't it, within him? And that's kind of like a mature theme, I think, that we see from Harry. And again, when he's with Sirius and they're just walking out of the Whomping, or the Shrieking Shack, sorry, and they're heading back towards the grounds, there's this brief moment where Harry thinks that he's going to be able to not go back to the Dursleys and spend his time with Sirius. And I think everyone's reading that would be very moved. And there's this real depth of emotion in this book, and it's kind of a jump from the first two. Did you feel that reading it?
Yeah, and I think that there's other like softer ways that comes through as well, right? In terms of like love as well, like with Cho Chang, that's a very like small section of the book, but those themes just start to creep in. But I think more than anything, the growth of the character of his father is also, I think, what gives so much credibility to that more mature side of Harry as well. And what I mean by that is, like, effectively, as we learn more about his dad, you kind of see Harry molded underneath the shadow of that to some extent, and he's responding to the people that knew his dad and like the legacy of his dad. And I think that the framing of James actually brings loads out in Harry, and you see him, as you said, like quite drawn to that often. And I think that does a lot to develop his character throughout this book, more so than the others to date.
Definitely. And it's the first time we get his mum, and then, like you say, particularly his dad, as an actual character as well. They've been referenced, but they've never had like a personality or a character behind it. And then with James, obviously it's easy for us to begin to draw parallels where, yes, he tries to connect the dots with his dad as he's sort of moving through the book, and he's able to, what's the word I'm looking for, sort of, some of that then comes off looping and right by the end series, because he recognises these as almost his own connection to the wizarding world that he's never had before outside of Hogwarts. These are people that have existed in that world that are his connection, that he was, I guess, always just relying on other people. So let's say Ron's family, for instance, and their connections, but this is something personal to him at this point.
What did you make of Harry's decision in the Shrieking Shack to spare the life of Peter Pettigrew? It's noble. Would you expect that of Harry, essentially?
I think so. I think that the way he has been built as a character to date is that killing is never the answer. It feels like that's how he's kind of been positioned. But I also think that it's the relationship of Peter Pettigrew to his father, regardless of what we now know about that relationship. I think there's also an element still of not being able to do that because of the relationship that they once had. And I know one might argue that, well, yeah, but he hugely betrayed his father. But I think it's a little bit like, if you think of like our own lives, if like your parents had acquaintances that you met later down the line, I think it's really hard to like assume the role of that you would have that kind of an impact upon them, because having never like met his dad in an adult life, it's probably very difficult to make any assumptions about what he would want him to do in that moment.
We're gonna move on now to other characters, but we'll come back to Harry, I'm sure, throughout as we discuss other things. There's obviously not the end of the discussion of the central character of the series. Dom, we were discussing Ron earlier, and you said it was a quiet book for him. I think that's right, really, isn't it?
Yeah, I know I've read it a few times, but I'm always shocked at how little Ron kind of does in this book. I mean, Steve, you might have read it and thought something completely different, but when kind of making notes of things to have a look at, sort of the most standout point of Ron was the argument with Hermione around Crookshanks and Scabbers as kind of his key plot device, really. But yeah, again, Ron kind of someone that had sort of been there the whole way through with Harry in the first couple, but is also not there in the Time Turner section, is he, at the end of this one, because he's out of action.
Yeah, which is significant, really, isn't it?
I think it's quite funny because I saw in the notes that you both have put that it was a quiet book for him, and I guess you would also obviously have the broader knowledge of the rest of the series and the films, etc. It wasn't actually what my takeout was, having read it, and I think that's probably because my initial response was, and maybe it's because I'm fresh off of it, but I'm like, yeah, but like he had a murderer living with him for like the previous 12 years, and like that is effectively what carries the entire narrative of this book. So I definitely know what you mean in terms of like how active he was less. But having just finished it, like in my mind, he plays the role of like the ultimate facilitator almost of like the narrative, because I think when it comes to effectively uncovering that truth at the end, he's so central to it. But I know what you mean, like, and I'm sure that if you were to look at the actual like moments of action, it's quite low. But it's weird that I actually, in my mind, at this, having just closed the book, kind of feel like he is really integral.
Yeah, what I would say, actually, because it's a fair point, what I would say is that if we think about who is most affected by Scabbers becoming Peter Pettigrew and everything that surrounds that, Ron, he sort of gets overlooked a bit, but he's got this massive upheaval in his life of this one rat that was like his for his whole life, like so sleeping in bed with him, and then overnight have to get used to the idea that the one thing that was kind of his is now no longer his at all.
Well, no
I
one's
always
asking
think not enough is
about the
made
mental
of that.
health impact on Ron after this.
Yeah,
Like,
can you get counselling for that?
But I do feel like almost not enough is made of it. Like I know that there is a moment where he addresses like the betrayal and how, but like this was the point I put in the notes. Like he's been living with a murderer for 12 years as like his
Yeah.
closest acquaintance is like a huge
Well,
deal.
I
And I
mean-
do feel even the book doesn't really cover it to that extent, really.
I mean, not just living with a murderer, sleeping with an old man as well. Let's not forget that. And he's a 12-year-old boy, and he had been, and he'd been with all the other boys too, hadn't he? Was he Percy's rat?
Yeah, lots of questions to be asked, to be honest.
Yeah, what are the
on that one.
chances of, but actually, what are the chances of Pettigrew ending up in the same dormitory as Harry when he finds a little family to take him in 18 years ago, or however long it was?
That's a good point. Yeah. What are the chances?
But I sort of didn't want to bring that point up because for thoughts that like there may be some more to that because it feels like it's ridiculous that could have happened. But I'll kind of hold on that because maybe not.
Well, it kind of is. I mean, you can't rule out all coincidence in a novel, though, can you? Like you're allowed some. But yeah, it does. It's strange, isn't it? And then obviously the one moment where Sirius Black spots him, he happens to be with Ron. It wasn't like he was on holiday in Egypt any other time. When he was with one of the other boys' rats, it's exactly the time when Harry's at Hogwarts. So yeah, no, it all fits into place. But we'll let that go. But yeah, in terms of the Ron Hermione dynamic, logically, would you have said you were on Hermione or Ron's side? Would you have taken a side?
Honestly, I just thought it got a bit much. Is probably what my like overall feeling was of it, which is, you know, I can understand his position, but it felt like it was really like he was really making her pay for it. But then when you get the context of, you know, who said rat is at the end of the book, it kind of is understandable, and that it's obviously a really central part of the plot. But it did have me kind of questioning quite why it was going on for such a long time when it was happening.
Right, and in terms of their own relationship as well, we've sort of seen Ron be quite mean to her in the past in book one, and do you think that they're a bit more fractious than, aren't they, with each other than with Harry and each of them, for example?
Yeah, it seems that way. They seem that. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say the crazy thing is that like it's very out of character for Hermione, isn't it? Whatever you think of the bickering, Ron, we kind of expect it from, I suppose, at this point. But Hermione, yeah, it doesn't fit with what we know about her at all. Although it does become clear why she's obviously in such a bad mood and a bit irritable the whole way through.
Yeah, it does. It does. So we'll come on to her, unless you wanted to go in there, Carla. No. We'll come on to Hermione then, and obviously the big central part of her book is the time turner, and there actually are, when you reread this, a lot of clues. There's so many clues, but they're very subtle. And
what a piece of magic, by the way. That could solve a lot of things, couldn't it? Let's be honest.
Yeah, it is.
I was really impressed by how it all came together, though, in the final few chapters, because I still wasn't necessarily sure I was going with it as a piece of magic, because I was like, it feels like it's a bit of a stretch, but the way it weaved in towards the end, I thought was very cleverly done. And what a piece of magic. You'd love to have it.
Well, in fact, there is something in your quickfire takes, which actually we'll come to now, because you kind of did guess this. You said later on, I think it was chapters 15 and 16 in your review, that constant reference to time with Hermione. Is she going to be able to transcend time? So you got so close there. I mean, you kind of have got it there. You just didn't quite know how it was going to manifest. But
there were too many references to the classes at the same time. Like, and it became to an extent where I was like, there's something in that, because no one is like trying to address why that is happening to her every day. So that was definitely a big hint. And you're right, like, as much as I'm like, oh, pleased to have like got close to that, I also think it was probably staring an adult reader in the face like a lot more than maybe a child reader. But the other thing that like I think is interesting with the time travel with Hermione, it's like the first time I can recall like another character getting that kind of special treatment that Harry gets. Like the fact that she's been gifted that from McGonagall, I thought was interesting. And I don't recall any other kind of situation where Ron or anyone else who's featured has been sort of specifically given something by obviously a high rank teacher. And that obviously only really got revealed at the very end of the book. So that was one of my like closing thoughts. But I did think that was really interesting that A, she kept it secret, and B, it had come from kind of McGonagall. I thought was quite a big revelation towards the end.
She's probably earned that though, hasn't she? She's the brightest kid in the class in the year. So if there's going to be anyone that gets that level of preferential treatment, she's probably the most deserving. But yeah, I wondered what you think. Like, why would Hermione not tell Harry and Ron? Harry and Ron tell each other.
Why would they not ask as well? Like,
yeah.
Why would they actually not say?
Well, they would just be so stupid, probably.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know in terms of, but it feels like, yeah, there's definitely like an element of secrecy about her generally in this book, to be honest. Like she's often apart from the others, right? She's often disengaged from what's going on. And I think she shows herself obviously towards the end of the book and slots back in, but there's many occasions of sort of being a bit secret and aloof that come through, I think.
Well, we have to ask you as well on Hermione, her crowning moment, the slap. What did you think?
Yeah, I can't wait to see it depicted in the film, because like in the book, I maybe didn't read it as if it was like a full throttle slap, because in my mind I'm still thinking like they're still kids, like I don't know exactly what it would look like, but obviously a great moment and a real break from like character as well. So it was unexpected, but
yeah,
very good.
It's one of those, you're right, that the films will jump on that and like it's it's almost forgettable in the book, but in the films it's center stage. It's visual, isn't it? Muggle dueling, they call it, don't they? In a later Harry Potter book, there's something that someone has a punch up and Muggle dueling.
Yeah.
I think it's Fred and George and Malfoy. Sorry, spoilers. But yeah, there you go, Hermione. So moving on to some of the big characters in this book. One of our new ones was Lupin. You described him in your voice notes as a carer in the Dumbledore mode, and I think you were battling with the idea of whether he was going to go bad, or you're kind of expecting a plot twist, especially as you were reading that Shrieking Shack chapter. But you must have been relieved that he actually seems to be so far one of the good guys.
Yes and no, though, I think, because I think I went on a bit of like a trust journey really with him, where I think quite early you feel, I think he's positioned as a really trustworthy character, and I made the reference to it feeling a bit like he's kind of in Dumbledore's mold, if you like. That's how he's positioned. And then obviously you have huge doubts in the Shrieking Shack scenes towards the end, and you don't have a clue what's going on. And then obviously you regain some of that trustworthiness with how that part of the plot unfolds. But I don't know if he really does, like to the extent. It certainly doesn't get back to that level of trust that you have at the start of the book or early in the book, because I think
because he's a werewolf.
It might be, but there's also like there's various like information that he's obviously held back, like from Dumbledore, like not been entirely honest on that. I think you have the fact that there's such resentment from Snape, to which I don't know fully the reason, if it is purely that he's a werewolf or not. But like I think that once that seed is planted that he might not be as trustworthy as you think, I think my assessment now is that I'm not where I was 15 chapters ago, to be honest.
It does become a little bit he swept it under the carpet, didn't he? The whole idea that Sirius, as an anime guy, obviously that's a crucial piece of information in terms of like capturing. At this point, he didn't know that he was trustworthy. I guess it's one of those that at the end everything kind of ties together, and actually he's fortunate more than anything that Sirius turns out to be the good guy.
Yeah. He does it to save his own skin, really, doesn't he? He does. He's too ashamed. He's too ashamed.
He's one of the first examples of some of the adults in the wizarding world that are unbelievable wizards, but they never quite get the credit for sort of what's going on as well, because clearly he's unbelievably gifted. A great wizard, really powerful, but that never actually gets described, does it? It never actually gets said.
Also, we're talking about him, you maybe losing some of your trust in him slightly, but it can't be overlooked what he did for Harry in this book and how great teacher he was. Even things like overcoming the Dementors through the use of the Boggart, and he's clearly a very compassionate and empathetic guy.
Yeah, that definitely comes through like earlier on. Again, like it feels a little bit like, I mean, it's easy to say this now, but like you get the sense that he has this. It's obvious now that he was friends with his dad. Like that is pretty much the way he is positioned, I think, early doors. It's like someone who is now looking out for this person, because they don't have that father figure. So I think he really does assume that role and probably thinks that it's his duty a little bit to assume that role, given he was so close to his dad.
Do you think it's strange that it wasn't mentioned earlier that they were friends, or by Lupin to Harry? Because it's not like it's a secret. There'll be dozens of teachers there that knew all about that friendship. It's not like Harry's never going to find out. So why wouldn't you say something early on?
Yeah, unless he didn't want it to be too raw, I guess, is the only thing. He might have just thought it wasn't necessary. But I know what you mean. Like, yeah, I'm just amazed it didn't come up somehow, like via someone, really, right?
Another man very involved in this book is Sirius Black himself. Did you? Yeah, we've sort of mentioned this. The twist got you, didn't it? Really, there was no thought in your head that he could be good at any point.
The twist got me. One of the things that was really not problematic, but quite funny for me reading this book. I don't know if we covered this in the upfront. Actually, I can't remember. But yeah, I'm sure you'll remember that when we were at school, I had a grey jumper which had like a knit of a dog in the front of the jumper, and you used to call me Sirius Black whenever I wore the jumper.
That
and I had
hilarious.
obviously
what a great guy.
Absolutely I had no idea what you were going on about at the time. So then when there was like references to the dog, like in my mind there was something there. So like a large part of this book was just me also like trying to contextualize the dog on my jumper from when we were at school that you constantly referred to. I can still see it now, actually, quite a nice jumper. But no, I didn't see the twitch. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. No, but I didn't see the twist coming. It would be.
So did you then, because of that, have any idea that he was the Grim or the Black Dog in Magnolia Crescent, or any of the occasions where he saw the Black Dog? Did you think, oh, there's Sirius Black, he must be a dog?
Well, weirdly, I think at the very start, that's exactly what I thought. So when it's in chapter 1, I'm like, well, that's the dog that was on my jumper, so that's Sirius Black. And then I think what was quite tricky for me is that by sort of chapters 4 or 5, it's just a guy, and I'm like, but I knew him as being the dog. So I was
great man, great dog.
Yeah, I've done like the reverse of the plot, and then come 360 and then realize at the end, okay, now it does all make sense. So I don't know if like that jibe from when I was 12 years old has made it any better or worse reading experience, to be honest. I don't think it threw me off particularly.
No, it's funny. So yeah, what about how your view on him as a wizard then? Like he's powerful too. He's escaped Azkaban.
Yeah. I don't think that you ever, I didn't personally, having just finished though, ever, I don't think of him as the power of the wizard right now, because I think for certainly the conclusion of the book, he is a sort of hopeless character, really, in the sense that I know he has a positive outcome, but you know, he spends the conclusion of the book kind of pleading innocence, and so I don't think like I position him as being a superpower of a wizard, and more so someone who was kind of wronged and was searching for justice. So yeah, you're right when I think about the things that he's done, but that isn't like what's top of my mind when I think of him, really.
You know, I'd say I'm serious. So we discussed it in the sort of preamble to this, Steve, and I don't know if it's something you kind of realised at the time, but I think it's the first time that we've got wizard adults giving Harry and the rest of the world information that's just actually wrong. So you're not going to see the twist coming. In the past, it's always been a case of the adults don't know either what's going on. If we talk something like Chamber of Secrets, or in the first one, Philosophers, people weren't even aware of the situation at all. But this is the first time we have adults that are A, wrong, and B, sort of intentionally misleading Harry at the same time. And so I think it is hard to see the twist coming, because we've always kind of had all the same information that Harry's had the whole way through, and that's been what he knows. But yeah, this time it's been hidden from him, so he sort of had to find that out on his own, I guess.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, and I think we've got a big question coming later, but with regards to like knowledge in the wizard world was something that I thought was quite interesting in this book.
Well, so the question I wanted to ask is, do you feel like up to this point, have you felt that you've trusted everything you've read, at least? Or do you think that will change now?
I think what's changed for me a little bit in this book, and this might not actually prove to be true, I will learn over time, but I think I really went into it with a view that like the wizards and the teachers have a broad kind of all-knowing view. And the idea, one of the things I battled with a little bit at the end of this book, that like such a scandal as this of mistaken identity has taken place, and the only people who have uncovered it are these school children, feels a bit of a mess. Like, and I think that kind of links to what you're saying, which is like, I think I had the assumption that that is impossible. Now, I also think that that might not necessarily be true either, and only time will maybe tell on that. But like, that was one of the things when I was reading it, thinking it feels slightly insane that something of that nature can happen. And it's like, oh, and the kids have now like discovered this, and everyone is just accepting that what's been said there is in fact true. Feels a little bit like there's probably some more to be explored on that, I think.
Well, when you say that, not everyone is accepting this time around of what they've said is true. Only Dumbledore, right? So the wider world.
I think this was one of the biggest, again, things I kind of wrestled with towards the end. Firstly, is when they're actually in the Shrieking Shack. I was surprised at how quickly there was like an assumption that this story was correct. And the moment where I think it clicks in is when Peter Pettigrew effectively admits, right, or assumes a position of guilt, which I kind of thought came quite quickly, because they were kind of all asking him, is this true? And effectively he kind of went, yeah. And I kind of like, given
but he's
such a big,
yeah, the fact that he exists is enough. Because he's dead. He's meant to be dead.
Yeah, true.
True.
But surely there's, but
and he used to be Scabbers, for fuck's sake. So he's hiding.
But is there not also like ways, like in his position there, that like he can still like fight for kind of innocence of having like killed all these people?
Well, maybe he would if he was on trial. You know, if it was if it was the Dementors or the Minister for Magic he was in front of. But I guess he was in front of, I don't know, Harry and his 12-year-old friends or 13-year-old friends. Like, maybe.
Yeah, that's fair. But the Dumbledore bit we'll get to, I'm sure. But that I think is interesting for different reasons.
Yeah, we will get to that quite soon, actually, because we're going to talk about Snape now, and he's very central to that that scene in the Shrieking Shack. But generally, as a book, we see more hatred from him, really, don't we? And that comes from the presence of Lupin as well, who's a member of this friendship group that essentially, he hated while he was at school.
Yeah, I'm sure I'm not meant to, but I can't just help but enjoy Snape's character. He's such a rustler. Like he feels like such a, just every involvement he has feels like it's worthwhile. But I think what is also becoming clear, and I think he's a great character because he probably creates more frustration in my mind as a reader than anybody else, because there's no way that like he has this viewpoint of like Harry and these resentments just because he accidentally got tricked into pressing the tree. Like I'm sure, like given all the things that are said around Snape, there is something bigger that is driving all of this narrative. But I really don't like know. I can't like tell you what it is. But like it just constantly with every interaction, it just leans into it a little bit more, and that's why I think he's a great character. But I don't buy that like the small reasons that are given, which is always a bit power hungry. He wants a great job. He's been a little bit mocked in the past. It's not enough for me at this point.
Interesting.
It's maybe the first time that and I don't know if you felt this, Steve, the first time that we sort of see where Snape's coming from a little bit as well. So in the first couple of books, we've had him picking on Harry. He's a bit like a defenseless 11-year-old kid who doesn't know anything about anything. And he feels like a proper victim and bullying by a teacher. And for the first time, we see that, or we have Snape put into a position of having been the victim at some point, and it's relatable because it's kids at school that used to taunt him or pick on him, and so that's kind of fueled all this emotion, which is obviously stuck around for so many years after.
Yeah, that's definitely true, but I still feel like I didn't that much get into a position of empathy towards him really at those moments, because it felt so insignificant in the scheme of the rest of him. I also think that when I think about him being that character, it's like I think he's also quite unique. Maybe Malfoy is the only other person who assumes that role of, with most of them, typically I think it's quite easy to say they're good or they're bad, but for many of the bad, it's really bad. So like the bad is like death and destruction, whereas Snape and Malfoy, they like straddle that line of like, well, they're obviously not good, and like they obviously don't appear to have good intentions, but they haven't strayed into the territory of being like really bad at this point, and that's why they're quite curious. They're still quite poised, I think.
No, yeah, no, absolutely. There's no evil demonstrated quite yet. I mean, I'd say Malfoy to this point has probably demonstrated worse personal attributes. Snape may be quite vindictive, and Malfoy can be just pure, I mean, in this book, he gets. We'll come on to Malfoy shortly, but yeah. Let's come on to. In fact, he's probably the person we should come to next, anyway. Yeah, we can do that. All right, so we'll come on to Malfoy. While we're on him, he gets Buckbeak executed by his feigning injury, and because he's a rude little shit, he goes up to Buckbeak and ignores Hagrid's advice, and then he has barely a scratch, and he's the one getting Buckbeak executed. So that is quite an extreme, thing to do. Even if it's not pure evil, it's more than just being a rustler, isn't it? He's basically, because of him, an animal's going to be killed.
Yeah, he's horrible. He's a horrible little shit, basically, isn't he? But I don't know. I still sort of like have him in the Snape territory of like, I think of him as being like Snape, but a bit more youthful, and therefore probably a bit more vindictive because he's younger and like more naive, and you can be like that as a kid. But I don't know. He frustrates me again because I don't. Clearly, there's like the wizard blood versus muggle blood thing that clearly is a massive driver in him as well. Like there's no doubt that is like a big theme, and he's very vindictive with it. But I struggle a little bit with knowing like where does he get to next, or does he just play that role? Because every school has kids like that, and they don't necessarily advance to becoming true evil.
It's true. Will it escalate, I suppose, to move beyond just kind of kids' brattishness? I think in this book it has slightly, to be honest. It has stepped up a little bit, but and also sort of against Malfoy, it does come from a position of power, doesn't it? So it comes from a position where he can sort of look down at people and abuse people, knowing he can like get there to be serious consequences. Whereas it's not someone who's scared, it's a bit defenseless, and he's kind of lashing out. It's calculated, it's vindictive, and he knows that he's got sway, basically.
Let's talk about Professor Trelawney, because she's a new character, but obviously very central to this book. What did you think of divination when you were reading it at first, and as a subject, and what do you think of it now, to be honest?
I mean, at first I really thought it was like a troll teacher teaching a troll subject. Like there didn't seem to be a huge amount of credibility behind it. And I think, as per many things in the book, it's like Dumbledore's also quite mocking tone towards it is the thing that really means it loses
And
a lot of credibility. And McGonagall. Having said that, obviously, like there is, you know, there are a couple of instances where it becomes true. Maybe I'm a little bit too, like, I have too much personal bias from like my view of things like, I don't know, like horoscopes in the real world, where I feel like, well, you know, you can throw enough shit at a wall. And maybe that's like bleeding a little bit into this as well. So I don't think I would yet commit to believing that there is much more there other than some. I mean, everyone also knows Harry's a target, right? This is the other thing that I was kind of thinking when reading it. It's like, I don't know if I necessarily read it. It was like, oh, wow, like she knew. Yeah, in fairness, it was quite specific in terms of timing. So you have to like acknowledge that. But I do think that there is the context of like, they know that Harry is this target as well, right? When she's making these predictions. So I don't necessarily think, oh, wow, how did she possibly know? So I'm sticking in the troll camp for now.
But there is one big prediction, if that's what you want to call it, a trance that she goes into at the end of the book. And do you believe that is going to be what happens? Do you think that gives her any validation?
I think I'd feel differently had it not been for Dumbledore's comments, which come after that. I think he says something along the lines of, you know, oh, that's 2 then that she's ever got correct, which is a real like put down. So he doesn't channel a great deal of credibility through her.
But is two not two, him saying that's 2 right, is there's credit being given there, because it's like, well, she's got another one right. And yeah, I know what you mean. Like, there's obviously a lot of this. It's throw enough shit, you're gonna get something right. But these felt maybe like more. He's suggesting that these 2 occasions were more poignant.
See, I read it as a bit of a put down.
Fair enough.
What I do think, though, and this is getting into way broader themes, it's like we spoke about the theme of time with Hermione, and I think like what is real in a moment in time are themes that like persist, particularly with Dumbledore. And I know, again, we're going to like speak about him, but like his response to everything that happened at the end, again, kind of suggested that he knew what the reality was.
One thing that if we're going to talk about Dumbledore would be exactly what you mentioned, how quickly he accepts the story, the truth of Harry and Hermione, and how quickly he dismisses Snape's version of events when they're, I think, in the hospital wing. Why is that? Is this because you think then that he already knows, he's waiting for this?
The way I would describe it, and I don't know if this is necessarily true, but like it feels like everything that like happens is almost him either like testing Harry, and that leans to what you're saying there. Like it feels like there's a sense that like he either knows what's happened or what is going to happen, and he's actually trying to understand how, I guess, he will react, and does he strive for goodness and truth? Because whatever it is, Dumbledore seems to know. And I just think like we've spoken about this a bit on previous books, and I know I've said that I think I've described he feels quite all-knowing, but that is comes on so strongly in this with regards to like the story at the end, which is just an instant acceptance of it, which feels crazy, like in the scheme of the scale of what they're actually talking about has happened, for him just to be like, yeah, that's all good. Now go and help save Sirius. That just feels like I can't believe that he just has that much trust, and that there wouldn't be more that he knows that can allow him to take that position.
It would be interesting in this book if he did know that Sirius Black was innocent, because he did obviously follow through with many measures to keep him out, and basically,
Mm.
I mean, more than anything, it kind of looks like an exceptional sort of speed of thought, doesn't it? That he's taken in all the information really quickly, and there's now a new plan, just like that. And he's pulled together all these like facets of where Sirius is up in the tower, the time turner that Hermione has, Buckbeak, obviously losing her life earlier that night, and that all of these sort of parts can kind of come together, and there can be a solution to it.
Indeed.
Yeah, it just doesn't quite feel, not that it doesn't feel right, but it suggests that there's something more that Dumbledore sees.
And the final character I wanted to speak about in any depth was Hagrid. He's obviously one of the mainstays of the book. He's not as involved as he was in Chamber of Secrets in the main plot line, but what did you make of him as a teacher, as a professor?
Yeah, what you'd expect, I think. Same as how he's shown up in previous guises, right, in the other books. Clumsy, prone to making a mistake, prone to kind of pushing his luck a little bit, but then always kind of, I don't want to say getting away with it, but like he gets so many chances, doesn't he? Like you feel like there are so many opportunities where like any other teacher or any other person associated with the school would be told like you should leave and would go, whereas it feels like he will always have his back. Dumbledore kind of would always have his back, or someone else might, but yeah, it feels like he played the role in this book that he's played in both of the other ones so far.
And you think he'll stay as a professor throughout the next book, for example?
Well, hasn't he lost the teaching role, or is he?
Oh no, he hasn't.
Still doing it just with rubbish animals, right? He had to like scale it back.
Yeah, the flobberworms were basically
out.
But yeah, he's kept his job. Buckbeak survives.
Well, he's at his purest, isn't he, when he's allowed to be enthusiastic as he is in kind of the first half of that book. And yeah, we see sort of a shadow of the same character when he's have to really like rein himself in, I guess.
He's a pretty emotional guy, really, isn't he? For a big old unit, he's pretty like he kind of gets quite swayed a lot, doesn't he, by either the kids or his animals or the teachers. He feels like he's a real emotional vehicle.
They run rings around him, don't they?
Right, let's move on then to we'll do your quick fire takes, then some of the stuff that we haven't covered in the characters. One thing you did very early on was connect Sirius Black to Voldemort. I mean, I guess that would be the obvious conclusion that you would assume. I mean, he's the main villain of our piece throughout, and if Sirius is Black as the villain, then you would think that he was an ally to Voldemort. In the end, it's Peter Pettigrew that is the ally to Voldemort, so you're not far off there, really, are you?
I think you just assume, like, if there's a negative character involved, that there will be a link. I feel like that's where I'm at the moment.
Yeah, and I think it was the right trade of thought. It was just that it happened to be his friend that betrayed them, that was Voldemort's servant.
What did you think, by the way, that there was the whole book was themed around not Voldemort for the first time as the main villain, and that we had someone else kind of carrying the load, even though we thought it was Sirius, but it didn't turn out to be. But Sirius as a villain, I think it worked.
Yeah, I think I really liked it. But as we were saying, I do think that I perhaps even prior to Sirius being involved have seen the narrative as being sort of forces for evil versus forces for good. So I'm not even sure that I look at Voldemort as being necessarily, a standalone sort of villainous character. I feel like there is a world there of which he is either, I don't know, like a head of or a leader in.
Head of
But it
evil.
was nice. Yeah, but it was nice to have. I really enjoyed having the layers, to be honest, and having a like a different direction of villain. I thought was cool. I was just struggling with this idea that like I thought he was a dog, but then I found out he was a human, and then he turns out he was a dog after all. That was the only bit that was quite difficult for me. But yeah, I enjoyed that part.
It's great that it didn't quite spoil it for you. That's the best bit. That you could have just had it all there. You're ready to just believe fully. Yeah, there he is, the Animagus Black, but it's not the case. The firebolt. You described it as a bit of an intervention, but you thought it was. But you didn't know. You didn't realize it was Sirius that was sending it. You thought it was maybe like one of Harry's usual keepers, Dumbledore, McGonagall, or maybe Lupin. You mentioned, like offering him a lifeline. But I mean, you were kind of right, because those Sirius does fall into that category now.
Does now,
but
yeah. I don't think I bought into the idea that it was like a sabotage, like when they were checking the broom. I don't think that I necessarily thought that, but I didn't think it was serious either.
Yeah, he was very ready though, wasn't he, to just get on with it and play Quidditch. Even he wasn't worried about the idea that it could have been Sirius Black, which is a bit reckless.
By the way, I was one of the things I thought when I was reading, and I couldn't remember who took which side on this, but I seem to remember in previous books there was a bit of a debate about whether the Quidditch chapters are good to read or not, because I've got a very clear view on it, but I feel like you two maybe were split.
I don't.
Can't remember. I remember they're obviously not essential, are they, to like the plot and everything going on? And I think they're fine for what they are early on, but by the end of the 7th book, JK doesn't break it up with like a Quidditch final just before the end.
No.
Yeah, because I started to find them a bit like.
Well, there's actually two Quidditch chapters in 5 in this book, which is quite mad.
Yeah.
Really. Towards the end.
This is the most Quidditch heavy of all the books, to be fair.
They win the cup, guys. Come on.
Yeah, well,
it's true.
It's the only time you get all 3 games, I think.
Okay, and then Lupin and Snape, you said, represent good and evil on the same sides of a coin. What did you mean by that? And do you still stand by that?
I don't know exactly when I said that. Like, I guess maybe somewhere in the middle of the book, but it probably links a bit to what I was saying about like Snape earlier, which is like he just assumes that role of like being kind of constantly bad, but not actually like horrendous. And Lupin, certainly at the time, was taking the role of being kind of constantly good, but not a savior either. So they're both kind of like, you know, that they're both like strong central characters, but they just have effectively a completely different approach, mainly to Harry, basically.
And they're both kind of, if not rattled, they're definitely both aware of each other, aren't they? Like it's a real arm's length kind of relationship the whole way through.
Definitely Snape to Lupin, like constant, like Snipes, for want of a better word. But yeah, constantly seems to be living in his head rent free, basically.
Okay, so we'll move on to plot points. We did talk about time turners, but let's get in a bit more depth. Dom, you don't like them, do you?
Well, quite convenient, aren't they? Or not convenient, as it turns out to be. But they kind of turn up when we've never heard of them. And are they going to continue to be a solution for the rest of the series? I mean,
yeah,
they exist, so why wouldn't they be? Because look how perfect they are.
Steve.
Well, I firstly think I do kind of agree with your take, Dom, and it's a bit, you're probably, as a first-time reader speaking to 2 pros, a bit hesitant to like call out things that feel a little bit of a stretch, because it's like, well, it's fantasy, you need to get on board with it. But it is like, that is one of the examples where it's like, surely this could have been used for other things as well, like prior to this moment, that are like massive, and like surely everyone is using it for everything all of the time, like if they're able to, but maybe they're not able to.
So
Yeah. So I know I definitely I'm with you a bit on that take, probably a little bit hesitant as the noob to kind of give such critique, but I did think that a little bit. I was like, wow, and they've got back literally with seconds to go. It's so perfect. But I guess you have to have some creative license.
And Harry even saved his own life in one time with casting the Patronus. So it's
Yeah.
There's been a lot of problems, I would say, and you could call it a flaw of the book. But as Dom says, there's a lot of problems now that we really could solve in future books with these time turners too. So yeah,
get the time to go and get the time turner.
That's it. Every book now.
Anytime something bad happens
book,
ever.
yeah, get the time turner.
Go on, Hermione, go fetch it every time anything bad happens.
Yeah.
Well, J.K. Rowling has said she wasn't like she realised it was a mistake to make them, didn't she?
Yeah.
Really?
Like put it in.
I think maybe the other reason I feel it is because, like, I know it's like, you were kind of able to guess it, but there's probably something in that as well, which is that they probably had to make the reference in advance extremely overt to then justify including them as well. So I'm not trying to like play it down, but I don't sit here and think, I knew it, I cracked it. I'm like, it was probably getting to the point where it was like properly spoon feeding it, that like there is something to do with time happening here, which maybe also suggests it's not like the most perfectly executed piece of magic that exists.
We've talked about the Dementors briefly. What did you make of them? They're interestingly they are mentioned at the start of this book a few times, and then also in previous books, but they're only ever referred to as the Guards of Azkaban at that point. But then suddenly everyone starts using their names once Harry knows what they are. Very, very conveniently. But what did you make of the Dementors?
Yeah, quite sort of unpleasant, obviously, as a concept.
You expecting to see more of them throughout?
Maybe I struggle still a little bit with like knowing who they are represented by. I guess it's like they're a little bit agnostic of everything, because they're brought in to protect, but then they're obviously inherently pretty horrific things, right? So there's a little, like, I kind of went a little bit both ways with them, and sometimes you kind of think, I guess at the start they're almost positioned as like a safety guard, but then they're kind of not because of the incident on the train. But then they become really quite evil and like an enemy, but then you realize again that they do have a role to play in protecting as well. So they really kind of go either side of that line, don't they? And I still don't quite know where to place them. Who owns them?
Well, like, there is more information to come, and I wouldn't want to tell you now. But there will be more. There will be more written about.
How do you assign them? How do you just get a shitload of them and be like, right, we're going to need you? Like, why did they obey? I've got quite a few questions that I don't really. I struggled a little bit with them.
Yes. You're right that they're sort of interesting just because of the whole element of they're doing a good thing, but aren't they inherently bad, seemingly and actually? Like in terms of who's using them, who uses them for their own devices. But I think one of the most interesting things that kind of comes with them is Dumbledore sort of saying we have to join forces with those that we don't find particularly pleasant to work against other evils. And so there's definitely an element of like who is prepared to work together, and we begin to see other parts of the wizarding world and Hogwarts and kind of the relationship that you get between those two kind of bodies.
Classes in Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. First two books, weirdly, I mean, you might get the odd introduction to some of the professors' classes, but in this one, we actually get back-to-back classes. They're going through Trelawney's attic door, wherever it is, up in what North Tower or wherever that may be. Then you're into Hagrid's Care of Magical Creatures, and then maybe you're in herbology. We're actually seeing them at school. Did you kind of notice that, or did you think it was more subtle?
Yeah, maybe more subtle. I don't know if I thought there was loads, but I really like those sections. I think that they're nice, and they also show like the breadth of like what Hogwarts is as well, right? Because they're actually quite varied in terms of what the different classes kind of offer. But yeah, I like those chapters. I feel like they're good world builders, those chapters.
Yeah. And there's always that element of they've got a class with a different house, haven't they? So you're always kind of waiting for the care of magical creatures class with the Slytherins, or potions with the Slytherins, because you've got Chief Russell and Malfoy at the front. So.
You know it. It's like Super Sunday, isn't it? You know who's coming.
Yeah.
Sky is coming up. And Slytherin, Gryffindor.
Yeah. It's an interesting piece on the houses. Like, when I think about it now, I don't know if I could tell you anything that I think particularly differentiates Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff at this point.
What, do you not know the actual differentiation?
I'm not sure if I do.
Well, I think it's been said, hasn't it, Dom? I'm allowed. We could reveal that.
I'm trying to remember which Sorting Hat songs would have had by now, because he keeps missing the feast, doesn't he?
Yeah.
So
maybe it's not really been revealed. I don't think there's any issue.
I don't feel like it has.
Insane, because it's something that is just a knowledge.
Yeah, it's just.
Well, Ravenclaw is meant to be the brainy bunch, so they're the really intelligent people, and obviously Gryffindor's like the noble and brave, and Slytherin is like the cunning, evil little shits, basically. But yeah,
maybe that's just not been like leveraged that much yet. It might.
And
have come
Hufflepuff
up,
is the rest.
Interesting.
Another plot point, which is also a bit of world building, but it's a massive piece of this book, and it's almost got the same the same importance of a time turner in terms of.
I knew you were going to say it. Just as convenient. Yeah.
Yeah, and what it might be able to do in future as well. The Marauders map is he's giving them the biggest clue. It doesn't it reveals Peter Pettigrew on the map. And what do you think when you see that?
I mean, as you said, powerful bit of magic that is. Was that the quote that's written in this thing? So that this is some powerful magic.
Yeah. So, but when it was revealed about Peter Pettigrew, were you not? Did you just not believe it? That he was on the map?
Believe what?
That he was in Hogwarts.
Harry sees him on the map, doesn't he? He sees Pettigrew.
Yeah.
Knocking around.
But
obviously Harry doesn't know what it is at this point, does he? Really? Like, I guess he's worked out what the map is, but he hasn't heard the backstory behind it being this kind of infallible thing that anyone that can only tell the truth, I guess. He's still kind of.
I just thought it was really clear. What was really clear out of it is that, like, I'm sure it's going to come up again, just because I think at the end the what's the time one called again? The time turners and the Marauders map, like, it was so clear that, like, these are being returned. So it's like almost like we're equipping you, is what it felt a little bit like. I think Lupin returns them right at the end to them, which feels like a very kind of clear sign that they have a lot of usage and power that will probably rear themselves again at some point.
And the map and the cloak together is a lethal combination, really, isn't it? Go where you want, do what you want. Yeah.
See what you want. Yeah.
It's exciting, really, if you're a Harry Potter fan, you know, or if you're a fan of Harry and getting what he wants. The fact that he could go around the castle doing whatever he wants, basically.
You thinking of Cho Chang?
Yeah.
Sake.
He's very young, so.
Well.
No, you don't want to be thinking about that too much.
I mean, that is
just thought, yeah.
That's the unwritten bits by J.K. Rowling, isn't it? What Harry's getting up to with that cloak.
Someone's probably written it. In that cloak, that filthy and stinking cloak.
Someone probably has actually in fan fiction, but definitely. Yeah, Marauders map, powerful bit of magic that I think you're expecting that we're going to see some more of it then, yeah?
Yeah, I reckon so.
But also, it was quite fitting, wasn't it, that it was obviously the full circle, written by his dad, written by Sirius, written by Lupin, went through the Weasleys. It's gone through the right people.
Indeed.
And then also the authors of the Marauders map were all anime guy. That's something that clearly, with the Sirius being a dog, that you kind of knew or were aware of. Well, they're not all animagi because Lupin's a werewolf, so the other three made themselves animagi. Do you think that how surprising to you was that this new brand of magic that you're hearing about?
Yeah, I think I had the context of Black obviously in my mind, so I had some of those doors opened early, maybe, but certainly like when the others revealed themselves, it was a bit of a surprise. I guess what has not necessarily come through yet in this book is the true like positive benefit, I guess, of being able to do so. It feels like it comes through in this as like it was an act of support, right? Which is, as you said, is effectively why they do it. And I guess there's a part of me at this point which is like, is it that useful to turn into a rat for like a small amount of time? But it's probably because it's not being used or leveraged for its absolute maximum benefit, which I'm sure it could be if you just thought about what you could do with that. But it feels like it was introduced as a like support measure as opposed to being like a power measure at this point. But again, wouldn't be surprised if it comes through again and it has a different kind of usage.
Interesting.
Just in terms of like the foreshadowing and things like that, because we're now getting to a point where there could have been clues in earlier books and they may or may not have been missed. But do you remember that McGonagall was a cat in the very first chapter of the very first book?
I only really remember now that you're saying that. Yeah,
the cat sat on the end of the road. And actually,
it's in this book. She does transform into a cat in the book.
Yeah, she does, but obviously we see it way before, don't we? We see it two books before. And actually, just on that chapter, I was going to say, we hear Sirius's Black's. Can't even say it. We hear Sirius's name for the first time in that very first chapter of the first book as well. Did that have any like bells ringing in your mind?
I doubt it.
The first chapter of the first book.
Yeah.
Sirius is in that.
Yeah, by name.
What's the reference?
It's his motorbike that Hagrid borrows to drop Harry off.
Wow, no, I really didn't have that.
No,
so I suppose not too much passes. Right? Yeah,
we all missed it, obviously, but it's just it can be nice.
It's great for the reread.
Yeah, good to have that stuff.
Wow. Yeah. Wow, no, pass me by.
Yeah, and then obviously she does it again, doesn't she? McGonagall when she's showing them about Animagus, but they're all very much more preoccupied with the fact that Harry's just been predicted his death, which is Trelawney's party trick every start of term. We have briefly mentioned Cho Chang, love as you call it, or lust as these 13-year-olds, 12-year-olds. Basically, is this a bit of a watch this space for you?
Yeah, I think so. I think it was notable how it really kind of just popped in and then popped out, didn't it, very quickly? And I feel like when the seed was first planted, I thought, oh, this is the start of like a real ongoing theme. And it never really returns. I think it returns once after it's first mentioned. Like there's maybe a tiny additional mention. But I guess that can also be reflective of what that situation kind of is like when you're that age, right? Like there's an element probably of like that is kind of reflective of if that's like the first time you're starting to have those kind of feelings, you're maybe like not,
they pop in and out.
Yeah, exactly. And you maybe don't dwell so much on them. But I think for sure, whether it's Cho Chang or someone else, like that's something that as they grow slightly older, we're going to see more and more of.
And just then on a couple of world building points, in this we saw things like Boggarts there, I won't keep you too long with things like that, but they were obviously very interesting. And then Hogsmeade, a new village. What did you make that when you had this whole trip and this entirely wizarding village? There's it's filled with wizards, and it's a bit like Diagon Valley as we now call it, but outside of Hogwarts.
Yeah, it's great. It's a really nice addition, I think. I imagine if you are that age, it's pretty much the best thing that you could ever imagine happening. I think it's nice that you do get to experience Harry there as well. And obviously I expect we'll experience some more of that in future books, given that he now has the approval to do so. But yeah, I like a nice world building. And I think obviously everything with regards to like the tunnels there as well is also, you kind of gain that interconnectivity, right, between the two, which I think is a nice part of the plot as well.
And the night bus as well, which is, I mean, I won't spoil it too much for you, but that's a big, like, the film really loves the night bus. They really go for the night bus because it's quite Muggle-esque, isn't it?
And our guy, Stan Shumpike as well.
Shumpike.
But yeah, I liked that as a feature. But yeah, you're right. It's also probably quite relatable, which I think I also mentioned in my voice note actually about it, because it does kind of feel like, like a dodgy bus you get late at night in London or something as well, with all like the various characters on there, which you often come across.
The night bus, just one little detail on there was, because I was looking into it earlier, and actually they're hated by the purebloods. So they're only really used by the sort of more half-blood wizards, basically. So they would basically thought that it was such a Muggle-esque contraption that they wouldn't use them. But obviously these are details that you don't really. This is an extra detail from Pottermore or J.K. Rowling in an interview, so it's not something that is canon, as it were, or it is canon, but it's not in the books. But yeah, so there you go. That. It's basically filled with all the. There's no Tories on the bus. It's just. Well, there you go. That's everything really we're going to cover. I mean, we didn't mention Cornelius Fudge there, but I don't really think there's much to say. Like, he kind of you know what he's like as a character, and he doesn't really. He's trying to save his own political skin most of the time, isn't he? Really, you kind of see that.
Yeah, I think the only thing that I did think on him was like in the previous book, I just sort of think I bucketed him in the group of relatively bad people with bad intentions. Whereas in this book, to your point, I think he becomes very self-serving. And then he's kind of a bit critical of Snape at the end, obviously, right? When he's with Dumbledore, which feels like something I wouldn't have expected him to do prior to this book. But as you said, I think you realize that it's probably very self-serving.
Exactly. All right. Well, there we go. That is all the views of Steve. So coming up next, me and Dom are going to go through some of Steve's thoughts and talk about that in detail and give you some real nuggets that we can't even touch with Steve around, because he obviously cannot be spoiled. But so for now, Steve, you're looking forward to book 4. You've got it, haven't you? You've got your with your little weird case or cover.
Yeah, I've been collecting the modern Gryffindor edition versions of the book, except the Order of the Phoenix, which is in low circulation and it appears to be very expensive. But yeah, I've got it ready to go, and I think the momentum of the third book obviously is so strong towards the end that I'm pretty eager to crack on.
Yeah, well, you said that last time, and it took you a few months.
It weren't that bad though. Do you know what? I was looking at those voice notes earlier, and I realised that I think I sent you chapter 6 at the end of January. So I was like, once like it got into that flow, what really helped was setting the date for the podcast record. That is probably something we should try to do for the next one. Not that I want to put too much pressure on myself, but like it does help, because then you're like,
yeah, there's a lot of pressure on it. It's a lot bigger book. It's a lot bigger book.
Yeah, exactly.
That is Steve, and we'll see him on the next one. Okay, so there he is. That was Steve's reactions, and I made quite a few notes here, Dom. I think that despite his voice notes originally being maybe the furthest away in terms of guessing stuff, he said he got close with a lot of stuff there. Just he was being quite vague. I'm not saying that he's predicting things, but he has foreshadowed of quite a few ideas, I think, throughout the main character arcs. So it's really interesting, because I'd love to play that back to him one day. But
yeah, I've made a few notes, and there's one in particular that I'm sort of obsessed by that he's kind of said, and I didn't really see that being the case. I thought I'll go into it. He said,
yeah, go on.
it's interesting that he doesn't think Malfoy is necessarily particularly bad.
Yeah, I've got that. Yeah,
Like,
and similar
as
with
you said,
Snape.
yeah. Well, I think Snape, like, we're meant to be kept
Yeah.
guessing, aren't we?
Yeah.
So that's like whether you think he's good or bad, or which side of the coin he's going to come down on. Malfoy, I mean, it would have never occurred to me at this stage to say he's not going to turn out to be a continued prick. But
No, and I even think that it's credit to him that he believes that now, because and he'll probably change his mind, because he'll be given no reasons to think that Malfoy will get any better. But obviously, we know that in book 6, he initially is the one tasked with killing Dumbledore, and Harry suspects him, and we suspect him, so we think he's an evil bastard. But ultimately, he can't do it himself, and he's on the platform in 19 years later, and he gives Harry like a look, so we know that he kind of repents in some way, and obviously
we see, even when he's at their Malfoy Manor at the end of the 7th,
of
or
course,
halfway
yeah.
through, I think it's halfway through actually, isn't it? Not the end, but yeah, he's not committed to Voldemort's cause, is he, by that point at all?
No, I know. So you're right. It's very interesting that Steve would pick up on JK's potential early clues. I wouldn't have even said that they were, but that he just, he's giving him the benefit of the doubt for now.
Having said that, though, sorry, final point on that is that Malfoy gets worse before he gets better. So
Yeah.
that prediction begins to look worse before it comes full circle.
This is what I mean.
Yeah.
I think that he will change his mind. I don't think you could, like, if you look where Malfoy goes from here. Yeah, absolutely. Well, particularly with Umbridge, that's probably Malfoy at his worst, isn't it? When he's
yeah, it has to be.
But he does also let Fenrir Grey back into the castle. That's also pretty bad.
Yeah, no, it's not one to put on your TV, is it?
And don't forget when he stamps on Harry's face on the train carriage in book 6 as well.
Yeah. That, to be fair, that's when I think of him as being at his worst, when he's boasting about what he's going to achieve over the next year without really saying exactly what's going on at the beginning of 6. Yeah.
Absolutely. Interesting about what he said about Lupin as well, because he's not fully trusting of Lupin now, which I don't think is necessarily the intention, but it does foreshadow Harry's own mistrust of Lupin in book 7, which I don't think is meant to be the intention. I think up to that point, Harry and everyone loves Lupin and he's great, but then in book 7, when he's kind of trying to avoid his pregnant wife and son and come away on the run with them, there is an element of Lupin being slightly untrustworthy. But that's just quite interesting that there's a bit of doubt now.
By this point, though, you're right. We've had nothing. I think I actually don't even think it's written that you could kind of be in any doubt that Lupin is kind of a good guy, because I think he recognizes his own shortcomings as well, doesn't he? He admits where he was wrong, and how it was incorrect of him to not mention to Dumbledore, let's say, that Sirius was an animagus.
But ultimately, it's one of his best friends through school, and you could argue that even if he had doubts about Sirius, deep down he probably thought he was innocent. He didn't want to believe it, and he was right. Sort of, kind of.
Well, that's an interesting one, isn't it? I've always wondered that. Like, does Lupin, obviously one of the most informed people in that situation, but without all the information, he probably has spent the last 13 years thinking, surely not the person that I actually knew.
So maybe he kind of just backs his instincts, and he's proved right, really. So yeah, Steve has sort of maybe stumbled upon something there, but not really in the right way. And like we say, at this point, Lupin remains a pretty great character and great man.
The other keynote that I had, actually, if we move on to Trelawney, is that just the not picking up on the gravitas of the situation at all, or seemingly caring about there being an actual prediction by the end of this book.
Yeah, we kind of gave him a lot of clues there as well, and kind of mentioned it again, but he really isn't buying into the Trelawney prediction. He wants her to be a troll.
Well, be fair, it's not one that I picked up on. I remember when I first read it. I think I breezed past that, and it didn't even really like resonate with me. And it wasn't until a couple of years later that I reread it and it sort of stuck. Maybe it's just one of those chapters that I, for some reason, hadn't properly like paid attention to.
But maybe it's because we just don't know the nature of the seer, and we don't know about what she goes on to do at this point. So we don't know the significance. We don't recognize it when we're reading it for the first time.
It's true. It's actually, I'd say, probably one of the best storylines to be able to reread and pick up on early clues and bits going on, the Trelawney stuff. Because everything, I don't know if we've discussed this, but I'm fairly certain everything she predicts, whether as like a troll or seriousness, actually does become true.
What was
the one
at Christmas dinner?
Yeah.
The 13th person, the first person to leave the table, will die at table 13. Was that true?
Yeah, that was correct.
Who was the first person that left the table?
Dumbledore, wasn't it?
Ah, just a few years later.
Yeah,
but he would have been the first person to die.
No, it's actually worth going back, and especially in that third book, it's littered with those kind of little things, because obviously it's where Trelawney's most kind of prominent, I guess, because she's a new character, and there's loads that I remember thinking, yeah, that comes true.
Another one though that we talking about Dumbledore, he was saying that he's all knowing, and I think he's always gone with that kind of theory about Dumbledore, but he talks about him testing Harry, and in this instance, no, but we know that basically he's kind of rearing a lamb for slaughter in terms of getting him into to meet his own death. So there is a little bit of kind of knowledge, or not knowledge because he doesn't know what he's talking about, but he's kind of getting close there. He's getting warm there, Steve.
No, you're right. It does feel like either a form of Dumbledore testing Harry, or relying on character traits, or testing him now so that he knows he can rely on those character traits in the future. Probably an element of all of that. But yeah, the Dumbledore thing, interesting, because, well, especially ironic alongside Trelawney, where we've got an actual seer that sees doubting anything she's saying, and then we've got Dumbledore who can't see, that he thinks can see all, and that's what's going
on. Yeah. Well, Dumbledore just knows what to do with the right information.
Yeah.
And Anime guy, he kind of well, made an accurate prediction that they'll probably rear their heads again. I mean, that's kind of what we expected, isn't it? But yeah, little does he know the next book is going to be a big one for Anime guy yet again. So is he prepared? I don't know. Maybe.
Yeah, I sort of skipped. I thought of Rita Skeeter, and then I was trying to think. There's not actually another instance of it after that, though, is there? That's particularly.
I think it's Rita Skeeter, and that's pretty much them done.
Yeah.
But obviously, that's a whole mystery again in the next book that is reliant on an animagus. But so maybe
she's a good world builder, isn't she? Because there's no like real plot to it all. She's not part of the main storyline, but it's just so great for like expanding that world.
Yeah,
allowing us to see different things.
The nature of her being a beetle rather than you kind of almost would be expecting an animal as the next animagus, but a beetle is kind of, it's well written. A few little bits that aren't really to do with what Steve reacted with, but we can quickly just discuss. There's a lovely moment where Harry tells Stan Shumpike that he's Neville, which is clearly a massive reference to the parallel lives that him and Neville lead. The two chosen one, he's the other chosen one, and he's telling him that he's Neville, which is again which is great for that reread.
It's the inadvertent tying up of their two timelines and storylines, isn't it? And there's a few little hints over the course of the series, and this is definitely one of the earlier ones.
In a chapter or two later, Fudge gets involved with Harry for the misuse of magic, and Harry cannot understand why Fudge is getting involved in this tiny misdemeanor. But again, this is repeated in 2 years, but in exactly the opposite circumstance when Fudge gets involved again, but this time to try and prosecute him. So there's a bit of foreshadowing there. And another example of foreshadowing, which I've got, is Harry saying in that exact scene with Fudge, is why would I go looking for someone who wants to kill me? Which perfectly foreshadows the forest when Harry has to go and meet death and go and look for someone exactly who wants to kill him.
Defining moment, really. Yeah. When the chips are down, Harry, that's exactly what you're going to do. So
that is exactly what you're going to do in the prime moment of this series. And there's another Cedric moment as well, which is that he wants to replay the Quidditch match. So he's the one that, the good guy Cedric, after he found out that Harry was knocked off, came off his broom. Yeah. Which again, I guess, is the foreshadowing of them taking the cup together. Which, sorry, Cedric, is going to be your downfall, mate.
We get Cedric in the next book. We actually get Cedric right at the start of the next book, don't we? Because of the portkey to the Wizard World Cup as well. Yep. So,
a big one. Recall his brief Cedric introduction.
I'd be surprised if that name sticks.
I wonder if he knows it's Robert Pattinson in the movies.
Well, actually, that could be the one thing that maybe helps, because the name's quite famous, isn't it?
Right, there we go. I think that is pretty much everything there in terms of discussing what Steve has had to say about the Prisoner of Azkaban. We look forward to hearing what he has to say in the next book. Dom, any closing thoughts?
I mean, just that after sort of the enthusiasm that he picked up the end of the third book with, that this really feels like the catalyst now to him kind of, I mean, I don't think you can rattle through the last 4 books, but really, really picking up the pace and really finding yourself engrossed in the full wider world that is on offer.
It is exciting, isn't it? It's exciting.
Sorry, no, it is, yeah.
Yeah.
I thought you were going to say something else, but yeah, no, it's great.
Oh yeah, it's exciting. Yeah. All right, well, thanks very much, and we'll see you in the Goblins of Fire. And we can cut there because then you come in.
Oh, perfect. I listened back to the voice notes and I was glad to see that I didn't make too much of a dick of myself. It's quite scary going back to them and thinking, did I say anything really stupid? But I went through them all before this just to see. It's really helpful to actually listen back to them. And
you said one thing quite stupid.
Yeah, you did. But we'll come to
Oh no, I've not even actually clocked that, which is probably even worse.
It was just a mispronunciation, which is our favourite kind of stupid, really.
Well, do you know what I do sometimes? I have to Google sometimes because I get nervous about that. So Trelawney, I don't know if it's that, but
you're fine with that. No. I mean, maybe it was a slip of the tongue, but I don't know. It must have been because the funny thing with the mispronunciation is that it's spelled very obviously. You've just got it complete. I don't know how you've managed it.
Have I done it multiple times?
No, you've done it once.
Okay, I will get to it, I'm sure.
But you've only said the word once too, so.
Okay.
So I wonder if sometimes you can do the thing where you read something wrong and just keep going with it, don't you?
That's it forever. Yeah.
But you're changing a vowel.
But let's wait till we get there. You can test me on it actually when we get to it.
Yeah.
Well, you can't. I don't think you can get through this podcast without saying the word. So.
Yeah, I have a feeling I might know what it is.
Right. Okay. All right. So let's do this.